Hello everyone, in this video we will learn about the gear joint and joint components. The gear joint is a type of joint that simulates the connection effect of two gears. It can be used to connect the movement of two joints through a certain proportional relationship. This video only introduces the unique properties of the gear joint. Other properties have been explained in joint common functions. The unique properties of this joint are bound joint and ratio. And like other joints, the gear joint does not connect bound rigid bodies, but connects to joints. And the joint type can only be a revoluted joint or a prismatic joint. The gear joint itself is not directly connected to any rigid body, but transmits motion in constraints by connecting joint 1 and joint 2. Therefore, it doesn't matter which node the gear joint is added to. The key points are joint 1 and joint 2, which will affect which the joints will interact. Usually, it is recommended to add it to the node object of joint 1 or joint 2, or their parent node. It should be noted that there is no order of precedence in choosing which joint is joint 1 or joint 2, as long as it is either a revolute joint or a prismatic joint. Other joint types cannot be applied to gear joint. Since both revolute joints and prismatic joints can be set without connecting to other rigid bodies, whether the connected joints of joint 1 and joint 2 are connected to a rigid body of another display object depends on the actual requirements. If you need to set motor force for the joints, although it's possible to set motor force for both joints, it's usually better to set motor force for only one of the joints. This is because two motor forces may conflict, causing unstable movement of the gear joint. Next, in LayaAir, we'll explain the basic process of setting up a gear joint. First, add a revolute joint to a node, and you can add the gear joint to that node. Then, add a prismatic joint to another node. At this point, you can set joint 1 as the revolute joint and joint 2 as the prismatic joint. Run to see the effect. The motor force of the revolute joint will be transmitted to the prismatic joint through the gear joint. Of course, this is not the only setting that meets the conditions for a gear joint. Developers can try different setups according to their needs. You can also set revoluted joint or prismatic joint to connect to other rigid bodies. Developers need to judge based on actual requirements. The ratio is a coefficient that determines how motion is converted between the joints connected by a gear joint. When a ratio is set, it's like defining an exchange rate for rotation or translation. For example, in the previous example, a revoluted joint and a prismatic joint were connected through a gear joint, and a specific ratio was set. This ratio determines how much distance the prismatic joint moves for each degree of rotation of the revoluted joint. If the gear ratio is positive, it means that the two joints will rotate or move in the same direction. The clockwise rotation of one joint will cause the other joint to move or rotate correspondingly at a positive ratio. If the ratio is negative, it's the opposite of a positive ratio. In LayaAir, comparing the effects of positive and negative ratios, you can see that with a positive ratio, the two joints will rotate in the same direction, while with a negative ratio, the two joints will rotate in opposite directions. That's all for this section. Thank you everyone.